In the following video, we are going to be discussing rice. Where did it come from and when was it first harvested? What types of genetic modifications exist for rice? What challenges are associated with cultivating rice? What countries use rice in their typical cuisine, and based on that country, how does the preparation vary? To answer all of these questions, we are first going to begin with the history of rice. Rice has been feeding mankind for over 500 years. It is known to have been discovered on the Eastern Hemisphere and was first planted by a Chinese emperor in 2800 BC. Only years later was it brought to the Western Hemisphere. One of the main problems with rice in the beginning stages was the high manual hand labor that was required per square acre. To put this into numbers, in the beginning stages of rice production, it took approximately 300 man-hours per acre. However, with the new technological advances in even the last 100 years, the labor has decreased to only 7 man-hours per acre. This has increased the amount of rice that is able to be produced. Now let's take a look at how the history of rice varies from country to country. First, we're going to look at the United States. The first rice plants that were planted in America were in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These three states were ideal for rice plants because of their rich soil and flat land. After initially planting rice in these three states, it took only a short 20 years for rice to spread across all of America and become a major crop in the agricultural industry. During the gold rush specifically, when tons of people were racing to California, rice production was necessary due to high food demand. Currently, 90% of all American consumed rice is produced domestically. Additionally, due to America's advanced technology, they are one of the largest exporters of rice. Once America had production underway, the supply was even so high that they were able to ship rice to England as well. There has also been a lot of studies about rice from Asia. First developed in the Yangtze River Valley in China, the rice here has archaeological evidence that shows that wild rice preceded the domesticated rice. In 2003, a massive discovery was made. The seemingly oldest domesticated rice was found in Korea. This rice was discovered and seemingly 15,000 years old, which challenged the original findings that the oldest rice was 12,000 years old. Stanford, NYU, Washington University, and Purdue all had teams working to prove or disprove this statement. Eventually, after much skepticism, the conclusion was made that the oldest rice is still from the Yangtze River Valley in China and that their findings were misleading. In terms of Latin American countries, rice is not native to their lands. However, it was introduced to their countries by colonizers. For example, in the 1520s, Asian rice was brought to Mexico at Veracruz. Additionally, slavery played a huge role in the cultivation of rice in Latin America. The high demand in labor was manageable solely because of these slaves.
This segment is going to talk about how, although rice is commonly eaten in almost every continent on the globe, the specific type of rice that is used and how it is prepared varies from place to place. Rice plays a significant role in how we eat, being one of the world's 3 staple crops along with maize and wheat. When people think of rice, they often think of Asia. This could be considered valid. Rice supplies approximately 50% of the caloric intake for over 520 million people living in Asia, most of which are considered poor. However, generally speaking, because the average income has been increasing in Asia, people have been diversifying their diets, which has increased the average intake of rice there. This includes richer countries such as Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, developed countries such as China, Malaysia, and Thailand, and developing countries such as India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. The opposite is occurring in the poorer parts of Asia, such as the Philippines, Myanmar, Cambodia, Bangladesh, and Laos. These places are experiencing a gradual increase in rice consumption. While Asia does account for 90% of the world's rice consumption, it isn't necessarily that people who live there eat more rice than people who don't. Their population size is a significant factor. China and India, the 2 most populated countries in the world, both have around 1 million more people than the 3rd most populated country, the United States of America. Thus, other countries do utilize this staple crop. The consumption of rice is rapidly increasing in both Africa and Latin America as well. Rice is the fastest growing staple food in sub-Saharan Africa today. Specifically, the developing countries such as Niger, Tanzania, and Nigeria are experiencing increasing income, which is having the opposite effect as in Asia. These people are consuming more rice and less cassava and tubers. Also, in Latin America, rice consumption has increased 40% over the last 2 decades. Now, the countries in the Caribbean have a 45 kilogram per capita annual rice consumption, while South America has a 70 kilogram per capita consumption. This is due to the steady population growth that the area has experienced. This is also the case for the Middle East, whose rice consumption has doubled over the last 2 decades. Europe and the United States have also seen increases in consumption. In other words, rice is important. As one can imagine, one aspect of a place's culture is their food, and rice is no exception. Over 40,000 different types of rice are grown all over the world, and they are a part of what make each culture's cuisine distinct. Evidently, we cannot discuss all of them, but here is a brief overview of the most commonly grown and used types of rice. First, rice can be classified as long, medium, or short. While these grains of rice are named so because of their length, they also have some other differentiations. Long grain rice tends to remain separate after being cooked, and has a dry and firm texture because of its high starch composition. Medium grain and short grain rice, because of a chemical called amylopectin, tends to have a sticky texture upon cooking. These different types of rice have their advantages. Long grain rice is used in rice dishes that are just rice mixed with other ingredients, while medium grain and short grain rice is used for dishes such as risotto, sushi, and pudding. There's also the texture to consider. There's sticky, and there's parboiled. Sticky rice, which is also commonly known as sweet rice, is used in many East Asian meals and desserts, or is often ground into flour. Parboiled rice is part of a rough rice because of its steam pressure process that it goes through. The grain is more separated, and after it is cooked, it becomes light and fluffy. A subcategory of parboiled rice is converted rice, which has been partially pre-cooked so that it doesn't take as long to make. Does this ring any bells? Color is also considered. All rice starts out brown because of the layer of bran that covers it, but most rice is stripped of this while being processed. A prime example of this is polished rice, where all of this outer layer has been removed. Brown rice is the opposite, and because of this, it has a higher nutritional value, although it does take longer to cook. There is also forbidden rice, or black rice, which is used in some Thai and Chinese dishes. It is very high in nutritional value in terms of disease-fighting antioxidants, dietary fiber, and anti-inflammatory properties. Finally, there is wild rice, which is actually from a type of grass plant, not a rice plant, and it originated in the very north of the United States. This type of rice is high in protein and adds an exotic twist to any dish. Lastly, there is aroma. Jasmine rice gives off a jasmine aroma, hence its name, while basmati rice gives off a nutty aroma, or what some people would say smells like popcorn.
Like any other living thing, rice has its own weaknesses. It is vulnerable to many harsh conditions such as disease, pests, drought, and floods. In the past century, there have been many improvements in agriculture due to progress in biotechnology. Rice can be bred and engineered to have genes with stronger traits to make it more advantageous as a food source, with higher yield and better resistance to less than ideal conditions. Over the last century, rice has become more and more popular in urban areas of Africa. 240 million people in West Africa alone depend on rice as a primary food and protein source. A majority of rice in Africa has to be imported because production does not meet demand. In addition, domestic rice is usually lower quality and sold at a lower price than imported rice. A solution for this is Nerica Rice, which stands for the organization that created it, the New Rice for Africa organization. This group has bred new types of rice aimed to improve yields for African rice farmers. Nerica varieties of rice were created by crossing Asian rice that offer high yield and African rice that are resistant to harsh conditions. Nerica varieties were created mostly through conventional breeding without genetic modifications, but because they were infertile, some genetic engineering had to be done to overcome sterility. Several hundred different Nerica varieties have been created, but the most commonly used are Nerica 1 through 18. One of the strengths of Nerica is that it adapts to the rain-fed upland ecology of sub-Saharan Africa, where there is no standing water. 40% of rice production in West and Central Africa is in upland ecology, employing 70% of the region's rice farmers. Another challenge in African rice farming is that small farmers can't irrigate or apply chemical fertilizers or pesticides. Due to Nerica's traits from African rice, it has a short growth cycle and grows quickly early in its lifespan, allowing it to compete with weeds. Nerica is also resistant to African pests and diseases like devastating blast, rice stem borers, and termites. Due to its Asian traits, it has higher protein content and better amino acid balance than most imported rice in Africa. From a 2006 estimate, 200,000 hectares of land, or 772 square miles, used Nerica in West, Central, East, and South Africa. Drought affects 23 million hectares, about 88,803 square miles, of rain-fed rice in South and Southeast Asia. In some states in India, severe drought can cause as much as 40% yield loss, amounting to $800 million. The International Rice Institute has implemented genetically engineered rice in India, the Philippines, and Nepal that are resistant to drought. Across these varieties, the average yield advantage of drought-tolerant varieties over drought-susceptible ones is 0.8 to 1.2 tons per hectare under drought. One trait is longer lateral roots that grow horizontally instead of down to allow it to absorb water near the surface. The rice also has high seedling emergence that allows it to grow early and compete with weeds, as well as a taller height that allows it to get more sunlight than weeds. There are other organizations making progress with new forms of drought-resistant rice. The National Institute of Agrobiological Sciences in Japan discovered a new deep-rooting gene in rice, DRO1, that makes roots grow downwards instead of outwards to reach water deeper in soil. However, some species of rice with that gene do not have the protein necessary to make use of it and grow deep roots. Quinandong Patong, an existing rice from the Philippines, is an example of this. Scientists bred Quinandong Patong with a high-yield rice variety, IR64, to create a rice with enough protein to grow deep roots. This hybrid was incredibly successful. Compared to a normal IR64, it had roots twice as deep and was able to produce 30% yield in extreme drought conditions that would have caused normal IR64 rice to fail. This new deep-rooting gene is extremely promising in making rice more resistant to drought. Flooding damages rice by preventing it from absorbing enough sunlight and making necessary gas exchanges to the point that it cannot recover. Rice usually cannot survive stagnant flooding of more than a week. Annually, flooding affects 20 million hectares or 77,220 square miles of land in South and Southeast Asia. In 2006, $65 million of rice was destroyed due to flooding in the Philippines alone. Now, new biotechnology is creating solutions for rice to survive flooding. The SUB1 gene was discovered by plant breeders and allows rice to survive up to 14 days submerged in water. This gene activates when the rice plant is submerged, making it dormant and conserving energy until floodwaters recede. Improved rice with the SUB1 gene has shown yields of 1 to 3 tons per hectare, following flooding for 10 to 15 days. Flood-tolerant rice is currently being planted in India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. Improving rice through genetic modifications and breeding is imperative because rice is a crucial food source for about half the population of the world. Amplifying its positive traits and taking away its negative ones improves food supply and the quality of life for the producers and consumers of rice. Current improvements to rice make it grow more successfully in response to harsh conditions in different areas of the world, from Africa to Southeast Asia. As we begin to understand rice better as a food source, we can scratch the surface of understanding the billions of people that depend on it.